seriously popular. The Trial Update.
Welcome to the Trial Update. I'm Caroline Cheetham.
And I'm Liz Hull.
So we're back today with a quick update because the evidence of the Medical Director Ian Harvey continued into very late on Friday. And a lot of what he had to say and the questions which were put to him were interesting. So ahead of us getting into this week and all of the evidence we're going to hear, we wanted to bring you what he had to say, just so you're up to date with a few of the key moments. One of those was his denial that he could have acted quicker to get Lucy Letby off the ward, which would have saved the lives of babies O and P, who were the two triplets. Now, Dr. Stephen Breary has already told the inquiry that he told Mr. Harvey that the number of deaths in 2015 and early 2016 were exceptional. And he highlighted to him that it was unusual that 6 out of the 9 deaths had occurred between midnight and 4 a.m. He also said he told him that various reviews had found Lucy Letby to be the only common theme. Now, this was put to him by Rachel Langdale Casey, who's the barrister for the inquiry. Here's their exchange.
Babies, O and P had died. They should never have died after that 11th of May meeting, Mr. Harvey, in 2016, when she could have been off the ward and referred to the police then.
I would not accept that as a result of the 11th of May meeting and the conversations that we had and the approach that Dr. Breary and the nursing staff had, that there was anything that would have supported any action.
Caroline, essentially he was saying he didn't think at that meeting it was being reported to him that Lucy Letby might be responsible for the deaths. He also said Dr. Breary wasn't assertive enough about his suspicions. And as we know, after the meeting there was a wait and see approach. Lucy Letby wasn't moved off the unit, and in fact in June she was given responsibility for looking after baby O and baby P, who we know were killed within a day of each other. And while he denied not acting soon enough after that meeting, he did admit, as we've heard other senior managers admit as well, that his communication with the families about their babies was not good enough. In fact, he said a letter he sent to the families with medical notes about their children that was based on the review by Dr. Jane Horden was crass, insensitive, unthinking and inappropriate. We know many of the families have told the inquiry that this letter didn't make any sense, and it was written in medical language, it lacked transparency, and it didn't answer any of their questions. Mr. Harvey also said it hadn't occurred to him that the families may have valuable information about what happened to their babies, which could have helped the investigations, so they were never spoken to about what they knew or what they might have seen.
You deprived the parents of an opportunity to have an input on the issue the hospital was addressing.
I don't feel that I can speak to what might have happened, but I accept that the families potentially had significant information that they could have contributed.
And as a medical director, a medically qualified person, why didn't you choose to speak or meet with a number of them as soon as this had happened and the communication channel had been opened? Were you worried because you had that duty, as far as you were concerned, to the member of staff, and you were not going to tell them about the suspicions or concerns about her? Because that's the decision you made.
No, absolutely not.
Well, you had made that decision, hadn't you, not to share the suspicion and concern about Letby. That was a conscious decision, Mr. Harvey, and one you stuck to.
Mr. Harvey also denied withholding evidence and information from the coroner, Nicholas Reinberg, who we're going to hear from later this week. Now, this related to a meeting which took place in February 2017, when Lucy Letby had already been moved off the ward. But the police had still not been called in by this stage, and Mr. Harvey was shown a note of a meeting which said, "No theme has emerged from the in-depth investigations." Now, this was from the meeting with Mr. Reinberg, and of course, by this point, a theme had emerged around Lucy Letby's presence and her behaviour. Now, Mr. Harvey was told by Peter Skelton, who represents some of the families, that the coroner is adamant he was never told about the doctor's concerns about a specific member of staff. Mr. Harvey denied this and said a letter from the paediatricians outlining their concerns was given to the coroner. Here's their exchange.
If a coroner is told that a paediatrician suspects a child has been killed, or in this case, a series of children have been killed, they must act. You're aware of that. They can't sit on that information. They have to act. They have to trigger a whole series of investigative processes. If they are investigating the child's death, they need to do so with that information in mind. If they've already investigated, they need to inform the police. And in any event, some contact with the police needs to be had because a crime is suspected. You're aware of that, aren't you?
I am, and I can't explain why, if that's the case, Mr. Reinberg didn't trigger it, but I am confident that I informed, along with that letter, that the paediatricians had reported an association with a member of the nursing staff.
Well, you certainly should have given them that information, shouldn't you?
Yes.
Mr. Harvey also admitted to Mr. Skelton that when he commissioned the Royal College to carry out their review into the baby deaths, it needed to be a forensic review, and it wasn't.
Are you aware of how murders are investigated?
In real life, no.
Do you know what a forensic pathologist does?
I can surmise, yes.
Well, they've qualified as a pathologist, but they've got a specialist skill in investigating and excluding crimes. And the reason it's a specialist area is because it's difficult to identify crimes, and there are particular types of investigations that are done, particular checks on the body, particular investigations which they conduct, which ordinary pathologists don't. You are aware of that?
Yes.
Are you also aware that in order to do those investigations, they require a history? They require information. In other words, they are given circumstances of how the body was found, who the person was with, what might be a possible cause of the criminal activity. That makes obvious sense to you.
Yes.
Again, looking back, do you recognise that this required forensic pathology in order to rule out a crime?
In retrospect, yes, that was an opportunity missed.
And just to be clear, the Royal College were instructed and they did a service review. That didn't, in fact, not only didn't look at the medical notes, but it didn't examine whether a potential crime had taken place, did it?
I got that wrong.
Mr. Harvey was also accused by Richard Baker, Casey, who represents some of the other families, of lying to them. He even said that when Mr. Harvey knew the police were going to be called in, he wrote to one parent telling her only minor issues had been uncovered about her child's care. He was accused of lying, of hedging his bets, and of fobbing her off in a letter.
I wouldn't accept that the letter I wrote was dishonest.
But how awful you would have known it would be to receive that letter from you, which suggests nothing but minor issues relating to care, and to find out a few weeks later that the Trust were contacting the police because they believed crimes had been committed. You must have known that when you wrote the letter.
I didn't know at that point what the result of a police conversation was going to be, and I was mindful of, and again it's that clash with regard to the extent of the duty of candour. I was mindful of introducing additional distress that might not actually have a basis.
You were hedging your bets that she would never find out about the police.
Absolutely not.
Just before we go, a few words on the witness we've been hearing from today. This is Sir Duncan Nicol. He was the chairman of the hospital between 2012 and 2020, but he'd also been the head of the NHS when Beverly Alec killed and tried to kill children at another hospital in Grantham in 1991. He said this was a significant event for him in the NHS. In fact, he was asked by the Health Secretary of the time to distribute the recommendations from an inquiry that was carried out after Beverly Alec's crimes. One of those was for there to be heightened awareness among those caring for children of the possibility of malevolent intervention as an explanation for unexplained clinical events. He said it was the responsibility of doctors and managers to make sure they were aware of this recommendation, but he said it simply wasn't at the forefront of his or anyone else's minds at the Countess in 2015 and 2016. He said he couldn't remember the detail of the safeguarding training undertaken at the Countess, or whether this mentioned risks to children from hospital staff, or if it was just focused on harm that could be caused in the community. He said his understanding was that any sudden and unexpected deaths of babies should have been reported to the coroner, but he wasn't aware, as he is now, that they should also have been reported to the local Child Death Overview Panel or the local Safeguarding Board.
Now, he was asked about an extraordinary meeting of the Hospital Trust Board, which was called on the 14th of July 2016, a few weeks after the deaths of baby O and baby P, when the consultants really started to escalate their concerns. Now, these extraordinary meetings were held in private, and Sir Duncan said Dr. Breary and Dr. Jairam were there, and he remembered Dr. Jairam using the phrase elephant in the room to describe Lucy Letby's association with the timing of the deaths of the babies. But he said at the same meeting, Mr. Harvey drew their attention to the possibility that multiple factors, not a single hypothesis, could be behind it. And he also said that Dr. Jairam had said the police would need hard evidence to begin any investigation. He said he was influenced by this comment, and we know, of course, that led to a decision not to call the police in at that stage.
He said it was a big failure on his part not to make sure the consultants were present at another extraordinary meeting of the board in January 2017, when Mr. Harvey recommended they consider allowing Lucy Letby to return to the ward. He was not present at another meeting a couple of weeks later, when the consultants were informed that no wrongdoing had been found and they would have to apologise to her. But he was asked about what he thought about that statement, which we know Karen Rees read out on Lucy Letby's behalf, when she said she was completely innocent and her life had been turned upside down by the allegations. Sir Duncan said he didn't think the statement was appropriate because he thought it aggravated matters and was provocative. And at another extraordinary meeting of the board, Simon Medland KC, the barrister who was advising the hospital about whether to involve the police, said if well-minded people still have concerns, then the police should be called. Sir Duncan said those words stayed with him, and he wished they'd had that advice 9 months earlier, in July 2016.
He also remembered Lucy Letby's parents wrote to him requesting a meeting. Now, he never took up that meeting, but he remembered that in their letter they wrote, "It's now 1 year since our nightmare began. There is a saying, innocent until proven guilty, but it doesn't seem to apply to Lucy." So that's it for today. We'll be back on Friday as usual with all of the details from the evidence this week.
See you then.